Hello, thank you for coming along to our video presentation for our paper Why Users Hack, Conflicting Interests in the Political Economy of Software. And this work was done along with my colleagues at Stockholm University. Now in CCW we're used to thinking about one of the activities we do is to advise designers and developers on how they can produce software that fits better with the user's situations. And when we do user research in CSCW, certainly it's kind of quite common to do these kind of famously known as implications for design type statements like designers should, designers are advised, or designers should design for, trying to make software that fits better with users' needs. Perhaps what we're maybe not so good at is actually thinking a little bit though about the situation that designers themselves are in, because designers are not just simply free agents who are put on this earth to produce the software that's best for users that can be done. They're also members of teams, groups of different sorts, organizations, for-profit companies, and their work is actually regulated by governments. And this sort of relationship, this kind of tension, is what our paper here today is about. The conflict, as it were, that can arise between users and designers and developers because they have different interests. And the way that we went about looking at that was to look at cases where users have to hack their software to try and deal with the fact that the designers are not producing the software that fits with what they want the software to do. And in our paper, we actually go through 4 different cases. We look at 4 cases, which are different sorts of user hacks. First one looks at where users need to get access to their own data by overcoming protection of different sorts. The second case looks at jailbreaking in the case of the Nintendo Switch. Our third case is the artificial pancreas system, where users retrofit their own solution, which is in conflict with some aspects of medical regulation. And then lastly, the case of John Deere tractors, where farmers are attempting to crack John Deere's software so they can repair the tractors in different ways. Now, these are all interesting cases in their own right, but they all rely on users going online to be able to get the information to do the hacks in different ways and to get support from those online. So for data, we made heavy use of online data, which is around these different cases. Well, we supplemented this though in key cases with direct interviews with active members of those different communities. There's a lot of detail in the paper, so I'm only going to talk a little bit about these 2 cases here, the CPAP and the Switch hacks. Now, CPAP machines are kind of machines that you wear while you're sleeping that help with various respiratory conditions. The kind of aim is that it creates a kind of positive airflow while you're sleeping, and while it's doing that, it's also monitoring how your sleep is going and various aspects of your breathing while you're sleeping. Now, actually, interestingly, for some CPAP machines, this data is actually held in a proprietary protected format. So it means that you as a patient actually don't have access to the data that's about your own sleep. And this caused some conflict because this was actually a deliberate designed feature, because it was contended that your sleep data would be analysed by a professional, by a doctor or a sleep professional, and that you shouldn't actually have access to it. The Sleepyhead software was software that was created by one CPAP user to allow access to this kind of proprietary format, and there's being an ongoing kind of online community which is about hacking CPAP machines and the data that they provide so that users can have access to their own sleep data. A contrasting case is that of Switch jailbreaking. Now, the Nintendo Switch console is a kind of very popular games console, and Nintendo, as with other console manufacturers, controls very, very strictly what software can be run on their consoles, on users' consoles. And it's actually quite a nice case, the Switch case, because there's actually a lot of really nice documentation of how the hack was actually discovered. But in the end result, the online community, which has sort of grown up around these hacks, It's focused on letting users both run software on their different software, such as Linux, on their consoles, but also allowing them to pirate games, to run different bits of games without having to pay for those games. The SIGCHI case is kind of an interesting one also, because I think it also shows that it's not obvious that our allegiances should be with users. It's not like this is a case of that the users are right and that the developers are wrong, but just simply that these kind of two entities, these two groups, have different interests, and that can cause conflict. If you kind of know your HCI, you'll know a little bit of a kind of classic kind of concept within HCI is Norman's gulf of execution, which is to kind of, Norman pointed at this gulf that exists between users and their understanding of how they can actually use systems to get the change they want in the world. And he called this the gulf of execution. How do users actually know how to kind of operate a particular system in a particular way based on what they actually want it to do? In our paper, we sort of kind of modify this a little bit to talk a little bit about the gulf of interests and the ways in which there's a kind of conflict between what users' interests might be and the interests of other parties who are involved in the development process. This is not just developers and designers, but might also be other users, might be regulators, might be governments, and even in some cases, there can be international conflict around who has the rights to actually decide what software does. In our discussion, we kind of pull this out a little bit to talk a little bit about the way in which software is made in organizations, and those organizations often, although not always, have a profit interest. And I guess as users, we're all quite familiar with user hostile but business friendly software. So obviously one interesting case is kind of digital rights management in different ways that serves the purposes of software manufacturers making money. And of course, again, we kind of think this is an interesting case because we have to sort of understand a little bit about the incentives and the self-interest of different entities. And it's not necessarily clear that there's kind of heroes and kind of enemies in this case. There really is this kind of thing that we need to analyze and think about the different interests that people have. There's also, interestingly, I think, and particularly in our medical cases, we looked at the question of the regulatory environment, and that actually government can have an important role to play here. So that's why we call it this political economy. It's not just economic interest, it's also political as well. While we're all familiar, I think, in our technology use of cases where it's bad design for users but good design for the company, we think this has not really been kind of adequately explored by CCW, and offers us some interesting new opportunities, I think, for thinking about design and the relationship between designers and users. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.